I'd like to go ahead and welcome today's speaker. I have the privilege of working with her on the game design team here at the Center of Excellence for Women in Technology. I'd like to introduce Emma Callahan as our speaker for today.
Hello. All right, let's see. So first of all, thank you everyone for coming to this event, for the summit. I'm going to be talking about game writing, portfolios, and a bit about my own experience about interviewing for a game design narrative position. Let's see. But before I'll start, I'll say a few words. So before we begin, we wish to acknowledge and honor the indigenous communities native to this region and recognize that IU is built on indigenous homelands and resources. We recognize the Mameke, Lenape, Bode-Wamek, and Sawa-Wanwa people as past, present, and future caretakers of this land. So with that, I'll talk a little bit about what the goal is for today and what we're going to be talking about. So I'm going to be talking about game writing, and specifically about the interview process and how to create good portfolio pieces based on my personal experience. This is a tentative schedule of how the presentation will go, what topics I'll cover. I'll start with some basic information on myself to kind of set up the situation, how this presentation came to be, the interview process I experienced while applying to a AAA company for game writing, what good portfolio pieces can be for game writers, what tools to use for game writing, and then finally we'll end with an opportunity for everyone to get their writing critiqued by others. Okay, so I'll start with a little bit about myself to kind of set the information I'll present today. I'm majoring in game design and I'm a student at IU. And I specialize in game writing and narrative design. This fall, I was able to work with an industry professional for our narrative design class from a worker at Insomniac Games who published a lot of the Spider-Man and the upcoming Wolverine games. So the story goes is Insomniac Games is hiring a game writing intern, and my professor encouraged everyone in the class to apply. And I was fortunate enough to get to the final round of interviews. So that is why I'm here today telling you about my experience and what I learned from it. Unfortunately, did not get the internship, but hopefully this can still be a learning experience for both of us. And I'm probably primarily going to talk about what to expect, the process, and my reflections. So I'll start with a little bit about the process of how I found this job listing and how I found other job listings as well for game writing specifically. So the company I applied at, Insomniac Games, released their intern listings for summer 2022 in around November 2021. So they started quite early. And I've seen other game companies open intern job listings at around the same time or much later. But in general, I found that it's best to apply to internships for game writing specifically because it is so competitive. The earlier, the better. I think in general that this sentiment applies to most tech and game and entertainment related internships just because it is so competitive. And it's also important to note that when the game writing internship application opened, the job was only online for about 2 weeks before they got so many applicants that they closed it. I believe in total it had 2,000 applicants. So it was a lot very quickly. So naturally they closed it almost as soon as they had that many applicants. But the other positions or other internships remained open. So like the programming internship was still open and the design one was still open. So particularly for game writing, the jobs tend to go fast as a lot of people apply. So needless to say, I found it was very important to apply as soon as you found it and that you kept up with job posting months and months before the summer, if that's what you're looking for. And you've probably heard this before, but job hunting is kind of a job in and of itself. It can be quite challenging to keep up with these postings while also being in college or working a different job. But I have a few ways to help with this. Let's see, for games specifically, a lot of game companies will post their job listings on Twitter. So I created a professional Twitter account and followed all of the game companies I would want to work for, or even the ones I wasn't particularly interested in, but I know they have a strong writing component to their games, so they would probably have a lot of jobs open for that. Let's see, and I also found a couple of websites that might be helpful to track these listings. One is Work with Indies, which is the one on the top here. And as you can guess, it's only indie companies there of varying sizes. And they post they don't have that many job openings just because it is a new website and community, but there's a good amount on there. And Work with Indies also has their own Discord server where you can network and talk to other people that are applying to jobs. I think they also have like weekly workshops you can partake in to develop your skills or get feedback on stuff. And Work with Indies also has a email subscription letter that you can apply to that will send you new job listings every week. So that's a good way to keep up if you want specifically a job in indie studios. And I also have found Grackle HQ, which has a lot more listings, but they're primarily much larger companies. There's some smaller ones, but primarily the forefront of them are AAA, big companies like EA, as you can see. And you can also see they're all over the world. So you see China, USA remote, Mexico, Canada, stuff like that. Let's see. And then for the application for my actual, to the actual company, of course, I submitted a resume portfolio, but I also submitted a cover letter, which I was kind of surprised to find that the cover letter was actually optional to submit. But I found that in general, it was my only way to talk directly to the employer before an interview, or if I even got an interview. So in general, I would recommend doing a cover letter, even though it is tedious if you're applying to a lot of jobs. But that's another tip I have for you. So these two websites again are Work with Indies and Grackle HQ for your reference. So next I'll talk a bit about next. Other than about the process I went through for my internship application. Let's see. So I went through the internship application, which the whole process lasted about a month. And I started applying as soon as I could. I also let my professor know, who had recommended everyone in the class to apply for it. So if you do know someone that is working in the company you're applying to, give them a little wink, wink, nudge, nudge kind of email. I said, I'm excited to see this interview or this opportunity. I applied. Thanks for letting me know it was open, kind of thing. Just to get the conversation going, stuff like that. And about a week after I submitted my application, I was contacted to do round 1 of interviews. And I found that these multiple rounds of interviews is pretty common in games. So I'll give a little bit about what that can look like for others. And this interview was just one person who was actually the hiring manager for Insomniac. So they weren't actually the writer that I was talking to yet. And they talked, let me see. Oh, I'll talk a little bit more in detail about interviews in a later slide, just because there's a lot of content there. But after the interviews, or the first round of interview, I was contacted and told that I was moving along in the process and I have to complete a writing test. And writing tests are pretty unique to game writing jobs, but you might find similar like task completion stuff in other tech or game related applications. Like programmers and designers will probably have some sort of test to go along with their application. And the writing test has a lot of detail to unpack there, and how it also changed how I viewed my portfolio. So I'll talk about that later as well. And then after completing the writing test, I was asked a final interview, and I'll also go talk about that later in the interview section. So here is the interviews. So I had 2 rounds of interviews, round 1, writing test, and round 2. And the first interview felt like a simple screening to kind of weed out people who weren't too professional or maybe were inexperienced or who weren't what they claimed to be on paper, just because there were so many applicants. And there's the hiring manager of the company, and the questions were what you might expect from most interviews, like what is your biggest strength or weakness? The interviewer also asked how experienced I was with Marvel or superhero franchises in general. As you might assume, that's probably what I've been working on. And the interview also asked a handful of questions about how I approached or handled criticism, especially when it came to writing. Like how do you critique people, and what do you do if you disagree with someone's critique, stuff like that. However, the second interview was a completely different beast. This time I was interviewed by 4 professionals in the company. I believe it was along the lines of creative directors, senior writers, and junior writers. And there were 4 in total, and they switched out every 30 minutes. So I didn't have all of them at the same time. But they did repeat some of the same questions, which I'll talk about in a moment. And this interview got much more into the nitty gritty. The questions weren't so much about work culture like the first one, but were very specifically about game writing. I'll list out some of the toughest questions that I came across in the interview. Let me see. Some of them were, give us an example of conflict you had in a group environment and how you overcame it. What was your favorite game and why? What would you change about your favorite game? And I was also asked if I had played any of the games that were made by the company I was applying to, and what I liked about it and what I would change personally, which is kind of intimidating to talk to the people who wrote the game and say, I don't like this, I would change it. So needless to say, it was quite a bit more intense than the first interview. And then, of course, all of these questions were asked with the assumption that I would answer them in some way that would be related to story, characters of writing, or character arcs, stuff like that. Something I found was to have your favorite game be something that you've played recently, because I had actually picked a game to talk about that I hadn't played in a few years, which they asked me very detailed questions. So I would, if you do find yourself in a situation, really have it down like what your favorite game is and why you like it specifically for writing reasons. And then also be sure to research the company a lot, and if you can, play their games. At the time I couldn't because I didn't have a console, but I was able to watch YouTube gameplay, and for writing you can see the writing in just a YouTube gameplay video. Might be a little bit different for like it'll be different for programming and design and stuff like that. Okay, and then let's see. So next I'll talk a bit about the writing test. So this was in between the two interviews, and hopefully through this you can kind of apply this to your own job search, stuff like that. But I'll talk about the writing test I experienced. So I was emailed a test just in a PDF, and it consisted of 3 parts that I only had a week to complete, and they're all related to the Spider-Man franchise. The one part of the test was to write a gameplay or short gameplay script. I think mine ended up being about 3 pages based on a prompt with some fill in the blanks. The second part of the test was to write a set of barks for Spider-Man to say in combat, and I think it was about 10 of them, maybe a little bit more than that. And the last part of the test was to read a mission plan or a design plan, which was a side quest for the player, and it detailed out some gameplay and the story beats. And my task was to read through and suggest what I would change, and then write a summary of that thought process. And then, since all the writing was based off an existing IP or intellectual property, Spider-Man, I also had to do a good amount of research into the character and world. I actually sat down with my friends and watched all the Spider-Man movies and took notes. So that was an experience. Hopefully you can find a application or a company that has an IP that you know really well already, but if you don't, be expected to research a lot before you kind of write or go into that final round of interviews. And of course, it's important to do this or to adapt your writing style to these different IPs, because as an intern or an entry-level writing job, which is probably what you'll be applying for, you'll be expected to write in worlds or ideas that aren't your own. They like to test to see if you can adapt your writing style to fit a different world or a different person's idea. And I also mentioned that I spent most of my time revising my work. I didn't think I would spend quite as much time as I did on it, but I showed it to my friends to get their opinions. I said I researched the franchise as well. And this took a lot more time than I thought it would, just the revising part, and I only had a week. So it's good to keep in mind that not just to complete the writing test, but to spend a lot of time researching and revising it. Okay. So before I move on to portfolios and talking about my experience with that, is there anything about the interview process that you want to ask about that I went through? There'll also be time for questions at the very end if you can't think of any now, but I'll pause because I'm gonna switch gears here. Okay, then if there's none, then I'll move along a bit for now, and there's a chance to ask questions later as well. Let's see. So I'll first talk about the writing test. in a bit more detail and break it down. So for my writing test, I found that different parts of the test made for good models to actually create content for my portfolio. Since game writing is so kind of new, even within the game design program at IU, some of the stuff we don't really know, we don't have a professor to tell us directly. So hopefully these can be a substitute for that for the time being. And these three pieces, the short gameplay script, the barks, and the revising the design bullets, I found were good pieces to put in a portfolio. They were short, condensed, and they kind of showed your stuff very quickly, especially when someone who's looking through your portfolio might only have a few minutes to look just because they have like 2,000 applicants. So I found that the good way to create short pieces would speak to my ability. And I also, in my portfolio, provided images of this. So just like a screenshot of the script, in addition to a link to the full thing. I found it was good to show, here's just a quick picture. I know the format of how you format gameplay scripts. Here's a little piece of dialogue you can read real fast. And then here's the full thing if they want to look more into it. In addition, I also found that it was useful to have both your own original game ideas on your portfolio, but to also have content from existing IPs. For instance, if you have any modding experience in games, that would be a good piece to put in your portfolio. As I've said earlier, it's a good idea to show employers for game writing that you're willing to morph your writing styles to suit different IPs. And let's see. And then for modding, you could include a gameplay script or side quest that you designed in a game. Skyrim has a huge modding community. That would be a good idea to do, like just write out a quest in Skyrim as kind of like the bullets for a mission design, which I'll show an example of that later. And you don't even have to make the mod, as long as you have written content, which is what you would be doing as a game writer anyway. That should be enough to display your ability. You don't actually have to make the mod. Let's see. So now I'm going to break down the three different parts of the writing test and how you could put them into your portfolio. I'll also have examples of each one and talk a little bit about them. So a cinematic script in a game is usually a document that has the game's cutscene where the player cannot participate in gameplay at all. And these are very similar to film screenplays if you've seen one of those before. In addition, gameplay scripts look similar to cinematic scripts in structure, but they also include gameplay and demonstrate the player's narrative experience that is intermingled with that gameplay. And in addition, it's important to note that cinematic and gameplay scripts can be combined as well. If they are, usually there's a call in the script that says that the player has lost control of the character as they enter a cutscene, and then also call out when they have returned control to the player. And in general, gameplay and cinematic scripts should be short and concise as possible, while still leaving enough detail to direct an actor or voice actor. And generally, you don't need to go into descriptions of the level unless they interact with the player. As a level designer and artist, will handle a lot of that content in a separate document that is written. And here's an example of a gameplay script that is kind of intermingled with the cinematic script. You can see it looks very similar to what a movie script looks like. You see there's a character ancestor who's talking. There is also call outs like this instance happens when the player hits the main menu screen at start. Also says when it transitions, like when there's visual transitions, stuff like that. And there's no gameplay in here, but it would say like, now the player loses control of their character, stuff like that, or when they also regain control. And this particular example is probably too detailed, like you could probably cut down a lot to be faster and more concise and more efficient for that. Okay, so now we have barks, which is an example of that. Barks are the lines that NPCs or the player character will say while the player is in the game. For example, Spider-Man will shout out quippy one-liners while fighting enemies. Or in Skyrim, as I talked about earlier, the guards will ask if someone stole your sweet roll if you approach them. And they are usually used as a reaction to the player's actions in the game. And these lines are often used over and over again. So in general, it's important to have a lot of them and not for them to be too heavy with information, because oftentimes the player will be doing something else while this line is being heard. So you don't want to give them important plot points while they're running around, stuff like that. Because usually they hear it, maybe they hear only the end of it or the beginning or not at all. And here's an example of some barks. So there's a line or there's a column for the instance of when this line will be read or will play, what character says it, and what the line actually is. So you can see here when the player completes the cleaning objective, this is like a house renovation example. So when the player completely cleans a room, the character Tamarisk will say, I really hope there's no mold or I can't see it. In actuality, there should probably be clean complete 1, and then 2, 3, 4, so on, just to show there's a difference. And that can also help with programming and audio. So like if they know that this line is titled clean complete 01, then they just know to put that in their programming script or to title the file itself the same. And that can just help with the pipeline of creating the game. And then lastly, we have mission design, which is just kind of a complicated example, so I'll have to talk about it a bit. But usually these are documents used to summarize a mission or a quest. Usually it can be side quest, main quest. It's usually broken up into parts. And it's usually what the design doc, or not the design, the mission design document will include is like how this mission is started, if there's anything before it or after it, what the player might get, if there's any significant changes that like an artist might need to know or a programmer might need to know. Like in this mission, the player gets a new ability kind of thing. You'd want to include that somewhere. And I'll kind of go through this example. So there's a scenario like what would predate this start of the quest, and you'd want to have a title for this too somewhere. Keep in mind that would be things like they get a new ability here, or the player character's model changes or something like that. Setup would be the location that this starts, or what NPC the player has to talk to start this. And then the goals for the player. So it could be like approach a town, talk to the mayor, get a quest, or be told to kill a dragon, something like that. And usually you'd have a little bit more detail than that, but generally it'd be short bullet points, so almost like notes. And then from this, you would make the gameplay script, which I showed earlier, to kind of, acts almost like the outline for the gameplay script. And it can also help programmers or designers know quickly what happens in a certain quest without having to read the entire gameplay script. Okay. So now I'll talk a little about the different tools that you can use to make these scripts. So you might have seen some of these before. Some of them are very, very common, but I'll go through them one by one and how they apply to game writing. So Scrivener, I think that's how you say it, is probably my #1 tool that I use for narrative design. It is a tool that allows you to easily write in the screenplay format, as well as usual prose, poetry, and other forms of whatever you want to write or what you need to. In addition, it has sections that allows you to write character descriptions or descriptions of specific locations so they can be tracked in the script. And the application is between $50 to $40, but you can get a free trial that lasts a month. That gives you access to everything. And I was actually able to use it for a full semester because the month of free stuff it lasts only when the application is open. So if you have it open for a month, then it expires. But if you have it for a full month, it will not. Interesting tidbit there. But let me show you an example of Scrivener. So this is a project, and this is what the window looks like. So you can see right now we're on the title page, which has Shepard and then by your name. This is very typical for film screenwriting. So that's why it has that format. And I think for this template, I actually picked screenwriting to make a gameplay script. So you would pick film screenwriting to use for this. You can see on the left, there's different themes with different titles, and they're in the order that they happen. There's a section for characters. You can see below the title page. You can type in character outlines or descriptions and then put it into the script. So when you type in the character's name in all caps, it'll link it to the character that's in this program, so you can easily refer back to it. It can be useful if you have a lot of people looking at the script that might not know what a character is, stuff like that. And it does the same thing for places and environment, and also a section for just notes and also research. And from this, you can also export all these different parts into a full script or PDF. It's easy to send other people and digest. Let's see. Okay. And the next is Twine, is an application that allows you to create choose your own adventure games using text and some simple programming. And I found that Twine is good to use for planning out branching storylines, which can get pretty messy if you don't have a good program to organize all that. It is a good way to practice and start writing. However, it does not lend to very complex gameplay. And Twine is completely free and it can be used in browser. And it's quite easy to use as well. And then I have Storyboarder on here as a kind of an extra thing. It's the storyboarding software where you might have seen this if you've seen movies. It's basically this small, it's like the in-betweens for the film. So like someone enters the room, they talk to someone, stuff like that. And it's usually pretty quick sketches just to get a visual idea of what it looks like. And this can be good if you're writing cinematic scripts specifically, or if you just need help visualizing your work. Because Storyboarder also lets you merge it with a script. So you can have a script that has lines that appear in these different panels of the storyboard. And this program is also completely free and it's quite easy to use. It's pretty simple. And then Microsoft Excel is up here specifically for writing barks. As you saw, barks require the line, the character saying them, and the instance that they're used, which this kind of lends perfectly to the formatting of her Excel with the cells and columns and stuff like that. And you can really use any table software or table feature in whatever software you use, or also Google Sheets is a good option if you want to work collaboratively with people. Well, let's see, and I also have Trello as a general like good organization software to use. They also have a corkboard feature that allows you to place ideas on a sticky note and move them around. I found that's good for planning out ideas or like a sequence of events, like writing out like this has to happen, then this, then the climax of the story, and then this. And you can easily write those down and move them around to see what fits best. And Trello is not free, but the basic version is, and it's good for, as I've said, planning out your story and also just general workflow management. And I also have OneNote on here. I personally use OneNote because it has just so many like notebooks and subpages. It's nice to be able to write notes for like character descriptions or the world building if you have a lot of that. And similarly, there's a lot of wiki programs that can help with that as well. So this is especially helpful if you need to be collaborative or if you have a very large world with a lot of world lore that needs to have like links to certain stuff. I'm trying to remember an example. A lot of D&D campaigns use this for worlds just because there's so much detail and it's very easy to organize. And because it's online, most of these are online. It also allows you to collaborate with other people. And my top three for that was Notion, World Anvil, and Notebooks.ai. I think most of these are free. I think they have paid options as well, but in general, you can use the most basic functionality for free. And then here's an example of Notebook.ai, which this is just the main menu screen. There's a lot of other things to it, but you can see there's sections for documents, discussions. So this is centered on that you have multiple people working on it. It also has characters, items. You can't see it. There's also a section for different like countries, places. It's really detailed application. So it gets down to like what villages are in this area, what their culture is, what their language is. Very, very detailed, depending on how detailed you want your word to go. And also it has prompts. So if like you need to have more detail, this application will help you develop that over time, just because it can be a lot of content to write if you're writing a very large world. So you can see here, it's saying, what is the name of this district or city? And if you forget to add that, it'll ask you about it frequently. Okay, so those are all the tools that I have for you. Let's see here. Okay, so before I move on to the writing critique part of this, is there any questions on the interview process or the portfolio or any of the tools? So we're gonna switch gears again. and also have more options at the end for questions. Okay, let's see. So we're going to move on to the writing critique now, the writing critique part of the presentation. So hopefully you've probably done some sort of writing critique before in classes, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about it specifically for reviewing creative writing and stuff like that. So here are just some quick notes on review for writing or critiquing writing. So be as specific as possible in your review. Try not to say this is good, this is bad. Be specific, like why you believe you don't like this part or why you think the audience might not like this part. And speaking of audience, it's good to acknowledge the audience that the piece is meant for. So is that audience you, and does that impact your perception of the content? For instance, if you just really hate romance and then someone gives you a romance-centric script or something like that, you should probably recognize, hey, this isn't for me. And I have to try to predict what the audience will like. And also it's good to tell that to the person that you're reviewing, like, hey, I usually don't like romance, so that's going to impact my perception of your work and critique. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Give both positive and negative feedback. Say what you liked and what you didn't. Remember to use a commenting feature on whatever writing medium is. So don't write inside their work. It can get messy when they start to revise. And then discuss the feedback after it is reviewed. Go through any major changes you would make or patterns you notice in the work. Also be sure to mention things that you would definitely not change or leave in. For instance, if you say, hey, I don't like this section, but there was one line that was really good, make sure to tell them, hey, don't change it because I really like this part. Because I've had that happen where people change a bunch of stuff that I thought was good, but I just didn't. You have to tell them, obviously. And then be sure, once you have that feedback, be sure to ask questions and get clarifications if you need it as well. Okay. Let's see, I'll give you some examples of what can be reviewed today in case you were caught off guard by that. So first, start finding your piece if you haven't already that you want to be reviewed. And here's a list of some things that you can pull up. You can critique prose, screenwriting, concepts, anything game related that is written down. Anything really is fun. And if you don't have any of those handy, you can also share resumes or portfolios if that's helpful for you too. So this is how it'll go pretty much. So you'll be put into pairs and breakout rooms, and you'll send each other your piece and then read through the work and write down notes or thoughts in the document for about 10 minutes. After this, you'll send the annotated piece of work back to the person that you're reviewing, and you two will go through it together, talk about what changes you like, kind of general ideas and patterns you might notice, and what you suggest on the next steps would be to improve the piece. And you also do this for about 10 minutes. So let's see. So after about 20 minutes, we'll come back here in the Zoom room, and that'll be at 12 or 12:30, I guess. It'll be, and then we'll come back. Let's see.
Hi, we're in breakout rooms right now doing a writing critique activity, so I will go ahead and send you to one of those.
Okay. So hopefully that was helpful for you, and feel free if you ran out of time to exchange contact information with each other if you want to keep working together. And then here we have the feedback form. You can scan the QR code, or I think the link was put in chat, but I don't know if it's the right one. Ariana, do you know if the right one is available?
Yeah, we're still trying to get the corrected link, but there is an option for you to say this isn't the session I attended, and I'll give you the name of the session here in the chat that you can put in that box. So I'm so sorry about the mix up with the evaluation, but if you just write down, if you just copy and paste that title into the Dropbox, we'll get your information. So if you'd like to share some things that you liked and some things you'd like to see from us in the future, we really appreciate your feedback and thank you for being here.
And also, if you have any questions about the content, you're welcome to stick around and ask. We have a couple of minutes, but.
I just got a new link so that there's a correct one. I'll drop it in the chat now. If you're filling out that survey and you are having trouble, I've just dropped a new link in the chat. That should be the corrected version. And thank you all so much for coming today. It was so great to hear from some of you. And we're looking forward to seeing you at the rest of the summit. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to either of us. And if you need anything further, just let us know.
Thank you for coming, guys.
Okay, and we are set. I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting. Great job, Emma.
Thank you so much. Yeah. I'll see you later.
See you later.